All right, welcome to the third edition of Before the Battle. My name is Nick Baldwin. I am the owner of MMAJunior.co, and as always, joining me on the panel today is the man behind the best fight picks and MMA Thought Twitter account. Please welcome Daniel Levy to the show. Daniel, how's it going?
It's going excellent. Good to be back on another edition of Before the Battle.
Indeed, and also on the panel is Vendetta Fighter feature writer Go Palo. Palo, how you going? How you doing?
How you going? I'm going good, Nick. How are you guys? Good to be back. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, you went on a hiatus last week. We missed you, but glad to have you back on the show. So, UFC Fight Night 69 took place last weekend. But before we get to that, let's just quickly talk about some big news that broke pretty recently, just a couple days ago. So, Jose Aldo had a fractured rib, and then he had a bruised rib. But now, according to other Brazilian reports, he does have a fractured rib, and his fight with Conor McGregor is still in jeopardy, although the UFC announced, after previously reported by multiple outlets and whatnot, that he was going to be fighting. But it's looking like he might not be, and instead, Chad Mendes, a top featherweight contender, could be filling in for the Brazilian champ to take on the Irishman for the interim belt. So, Daniel, we'll quickly start with you. What are your thoughts on Jose Aldo being hurt, first off, and do you think he'll make it to the fight?
Well, I'll tell you this. Dana White and Matt Serra were at my gym Knuckle Up today filming the reality show, so I asked the boss firsthand, will Jose Aldo fight in 2 weeks at UFC 189, July 11th, 2015? And Dana White told me Jose Aldo will fight at UFC 189 in 2 weeks on July 11th. And he also told me that Cowboy Cerrone had the exact same injury when he fought John Makdessi a couple weeks back. So the boss man didn't seem too concerned, and I'm feeling pretty optimistic that the fight's going to go on as planned.
And Palo, do you think Aldo will show up to UFC 189 on July 11th, or do you think it'll be money instead?
No, I think Aldo's going to show up. I don't think there's a chance in hell Aldo will miss this fight. He'll do whatever he can to get into this fight. I mean, there's so much money on the table. He'd rather show up to the fight, get paid, and risk losing and get an immediate title shot than just bow out altogether.
I don't know. I really don't know if Jose Aldo is going to show up on July 11th or not. I want him to. Of course, I want Aldo versus McGregor, but I really am thinking it might be Chad Mendes fighting for the interim title on July 11th, just because Chris Weidman and TJ Dillashaw both pulled out of their championship fights with a fractured rib. And now that you say Donald Cerrone didn't pull out with the same injury, but Donald Cowboy Cerrone no one is like Donald Cowboy Cerrone. He will not pull out whatsoever. He basically wanted to fight instead of fighting for the title later on this year, but apparently Greg Jackson was really, really wanting him to wait. But I just don't know if Aldo's going to show up. I think he might pull out despite the huge amount of money he's being offered to fight possibly injured, whatever his injury really is. So anyways, UFC Fight Night 69 took place this past weekend from Berlin, Germany, and in the main event, Joanna Jędrzejczyk proved why she's at the top of the women's strawweight division with the third-round mauling of Jessica Penne. So Daniel, I know we were all very confident in Joanna Jędrzejczyk, not to just get the win, but to get the stoppage win. What were your thoughts on the fight, and who do you think's next for the champ?
You know, it was absolutely incredible. The way she sets up her strikes, her jab, her push kick, and then she sets up the power strikes by using those strikes up front. And obviously, she does have the 6-time Muay Thai championship credentials, which she brings into the ring every single time. And that's exactly what she showed that night. And, I personally thought that the ref or the corner would have stopped the fight earlier. Jessica Penne wasn't doing a thing except getting her face beat in for 3 rounds, 2.5 rounds. So it was kind of sad to see, but on the flip side, the technique displayed by the champion was absolutely beautiful. I was on the Parting Shot podcast, and I was saying that maybe Paige Van Zandt could get it, but obviously she just got matched up with Alex Chambers. She's still working her way up. She's still super young. So I'm going to say what every single other person is saying, and the winner of Gadelha versus Aguilar.
I like that as well. I think that's the really only thing that makes sense, other than if the UFC was to rush Paige Van Zandt into a title shot at 21 years old. But really, that does not make any sense, because I think Joanna would probably light her up on the feet, and I don't think the UFC wants that to happen to their future to their future potential star in the UFC. So, Palo, what were your thoughts on Joanna Jędrzejczyk's beating of Jessica Penne?
It went exactly as how like everyone and their mamas pretty much predicted, right? Penny wasn't as good of a wrestler as Esparza was, and Esparza couldn't get Jędrzejczyk down, so Penny's chances were even slimmer. The only way I saw Penny winning was if Jędrzejczyk made like a mistake, she had like a little brain fart, and Penny caught her in a submission. But that obviously didn't happen. She just got lit up for all 3 rounds. I mean, she managed to have that little judo throw at the end of the first, but that's pretty much like her only shining moment in the whole fight.
And so moving on to the co-main event, Tatsuya Kawajiri picked up a must-need win over Dennis Siver. Obviously, he moved up the rankings a few spots with his win over number 12, Siver, who's now down at number 15 where Kawajiri was. So, Daniel, it wasn't a great fight, but definitely a needed win for Kawajiri. What were your thoughts on the fight, and what do you think's next for him?
You know, it was good to see that even though the first round didn't go his way, he didn't give up, and he kept trying to pursue the victory. And, you know, maybe we could make an argument that the notorious Conor McGregor took away Dennis Siver's soul because, you know, at least against McGregor, even though he was getting his butt whooped the entire duration of the fight, at least he came out and wanted to fight. This time it seemed like, you know, he didn't want to be there. And it was kind of interesting because it was in Germany. He is a German. So I thought that he'd want to put on for his city, as they like to say. But, you know, Kawajiri, he looked in better physical shape than he's ever looked, and you know what? Maybe they should throw him at the upcoming Mirsad Bektik, and let's see what happens.
And that is definitely a solid argument you can make that Conor McGregor stole Siver's soul. But another argument you can make is since the Irishman earned his title shot against Dennis Siver, I know Palo's on the same page. I think Tatsuya Kawajiri earns a title shot with a decision win over Siver. Am I right? I think a Crusher should fill in for Aldo instead of Mendez. But anyways, but definitely not the best co-main event. But quickly, Palo, what are your thoughts on that fight, and what's next for the Crusher?
I actually picked Siver in that fight, but that really wasn't a very inspiring fight in my opinion. I think they were two fighters that were like past their prime. I mean, Kawajiri looked better, but it wasn't mainly because Siver was like so depleted more than Kawajiri was. It's just like he kept going for that guillotine when Kawajiri kept taking him down instead of just trying to stuff it properly, and you know that never usually works out unless you're like a Fabricio Verdum or someone like that. So like I don't know, I'm really not taking a lot away from this. Kawajiri won, but if you face him up with an upcoming prospect like Bektik, like Daniel said, I think Bektik is gonna smoke him.
And so also on the main card, Peter Sabota picked up a very quick submission win over Stephen Kennedy. Quickly, Daniel, what were your thoughts on this first-round stoppage of Stephen Kennedy?
You know, it went the way I expected it to go. You know, Peter Sabota, he was training to fight Serginho Moraes, who's one of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys, not just in the UFC, but in the world. So the fact that he got the step down on short notice against Stephen Kennedy, he really got to show off the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu he had been training in that training camp ahead of his potential bout with Sergio Moraes. So as far as what's next for Peter Sabota, I'd like him to take on Sergio Moraes.
And Palo, any thoughts on this main card bout? Obviously, Sabota picked up the win pretty quickly. Did it go as planned for you?
Yeah, it did. If anything, this could have been my DNP that I should have played Sabota in a parlay somewhere. I just wasn't confident in parlaying him with someone else because if you parlay him with Jędrzejczyk, it was still minus money, and I'm like, European cards, there's always something crazy that happens, and I don't want to risk throwing too much juice on that. But yeah, I mean, he was already set up against Moraes, who's a much better Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighter, so it was a step down. So he did it as everyone pretty much predicted.
And so the final main card bout was a lightweight bout between Nick Hein and Lucas Sajewski. And I know, Daniel, you taught me how to pronounce that last name, but I still can't get it, so I'm going with Sajewski. And so what are your thoughts on that fight, Daniel?
You know, it didn't go how I thought it would. I thought that Sajewski was going to be able to neutralize Nick Hein, and actually the opposite of that happened. So props to Nick Hein. He went out there, he established his jab, and, you know, it was a very close fight, but it was definitely a 30-27 for Nick Hein. So, you know, props to him, and we'll expect to see him on the next German card.
And I actually thought Nick Hein was going to pick up a very quick TKO win, but obviously he showed that he doesn't have as much power as people thought, possibly at least I thought, and he picked up that dominant decision. So Palo, any thoughts on that fight?
I didn't really know much about Sayevsky going in, but like a lot of guys who really knew about him, like Daniel, thought were really high on him. So, but I still had tempered expectations seeing it. I was kind of high on Hein actually, but I didn't bet him as a thing because of the support that Sayevsky was getting. So, but Hein pretty much dominated that fight, or he pretty much put on a clinic there. And I think Hein's I think he's a lot better than the credit that he's getting for. So. I mean, he's also pretty small for the division. I think he could maybe drop down to featherweight if anything. But he's pretty good. He's a little bit old. I think he's in his early 30s or something. But he's pretty young into his MMA career. So I think he's still he's still in his prime if he hasn't even hit it yet.
So obviously both of you guys are bettors, and so Daniel, quickly just go through how you did for UFC Fight Night 69 betting wise.
I lost 1 unit. And you know what? It happens, man. Long-term game, no excuses. But as far as what I didn't bet, what I would have liked to bet was Taylor Lapilus. I got to give credit where credit's due. My co-host of the podcast, Flying with Best Fight Picks, Flying Brian, he bet Taylor Lapilus. He had, the goal to actually put his money on the line and take Taylor Lapilus. So I just got to give him props for that. I wish I would have listened.
I also bet Lapilus, but we'll get to that in just a second. So, Palo, how did you do for UFC Fight Night 69?
I went 1-1 on my bets to win 0.7 units, I think. My bet I had 2 underdog bets on Noah Lahat and Alan Patrick. Patrick, obviously, as we know, lost, and Noah Lahat won a pretty controversial decision against Backstrom, but, I'll take it, if anything.
Yeah, exactly. I had money on Lahat also, and so I was sweating while that decision was read because I think it was a 28-28, 29-29, and 29, or 29-28 and another 29-28, and I thought those 29-28s were going to go to Backstrom, but obviously Lahat picked up that majority decision. But so for me, I was the big winner, but my units are smaller than your guys's, so really we'll see what counts. But anyways, I went up 8.27 units. I had money on Lapilus, which obviously cashed. I played him inside the distance, actually. And then I had a parlay. I believe most of my parlays didn't cash. I had Seaver in one, so obviously that didn't work out. But overall did pretty well. Like I said, I had Lahat. I had him via decision, actually. That was around plus 400 or so. So that barely cashed, like we said. But overall pretty good night for me. So UFC Fight Night 70 takes place from Hollywood, Florida today, actually. And in the main event, Lyoto Machida looks to get back into winning ways against the always dangerous Yoel Romero. So first off, before we go through the main card fights and some prelims and whatnot, I just want to get your thoughts on the card because it's not a stacked card, but overall, I think there will be a lot of fights. I think there will be a lot of finishes. It is the 25-foot cage, the small cage, rather than the regular 30-foot cage. The small cage always means lots of stoppages, lots of good fights, and rarely lots of decisions. So, I'm very excited for tonight, actually, even though there's not tons of names or whatnot. But how can you miss Romero versus Machida? That's going to be a very, very good fight, and I think that's going to be stopped before the 25-minute limit. So, Palo, what are your thoughts on just the overall card? Obviously, like I said, there's not too many big names, but I think it'll be a good night of fights.
Yeah, it's usually these cards where there's not really a lot of recognizable names that tends to deliver, because I feel like a lot of those fighters, they have less to lose and more to prove, so they really go out there and put on a show, right? As opposed to the bigger name fighters where they're trying to get their title shot, they're trying to move up the rankings, they're trying to get their win money, so they might take less risks. So from a fan's perspective, this card should be very entertaining, and not to mention that we have lower expectations for these cards because we really don't know what to expect from these guys. But from a betting perspective, I really don't like this card at all.
And Daniel, are you on the same page? Do you think it'll be a fun night of fights because our expectations are so low?
Well, oftentimes when people trash a card or say that this card sucks before it even happened, that's usually when it tends to be the most action, the most finishes, because like Paolo said, these guys have a lot to prove. You know, a lot of these guys are making their UFC debuts on short notice and up a weight class because the card kind of fell apart a little bit. So, you know, Joe Silva and Sean Shelby, they had to scramble together to, you know, to get more fights and keep the card together. So I'm expecting it to be a very exciting card in terms of finishes.
I should mention that there was a big visa issue with this was supposed to be the Tough Brazil 4 finale. Those two finales, I believe it's bantamweight and lightweight, are moved to UFC 190, which is now a big pay-per-view card. It has 13 fights, but nonetheless, it's not the Tough Brazil 4 finale really anymore. And funny enough, the Tough Brazil 4 was filmed in Las Vegas, is a Brazilian The Ultimate Fighter, and the finale, or what was supposed to be the finale, is in Florida, so kind of interesting there. But, so kicking off the main card, Hakran Diaz takes on Levan Makashvili. Diaz is number 14 in the featherweight division. Makashvili is coming off his successful debut against Mark Adiva in Manila last May. Who do you have here, Daniel?
You know, this is a very close fight on paper. With Hakran Diaz, he is a Novo União fighter, but usually when you talk about Novo União fighters, you expect, you know, the big leg kicks, the left hook to the body, you know, those big combos, the flying knees. But what Hakran Diaz actually does is he's the grinder of Novo União. So when you talk about the takedown defense that someone like Jose Aldo or Renan Barão has, that's a direct result of the fact that they train with Hakran Diaz on a daily basis. Now, as far as his striking is concerned, he does have a similar shot selection to a Jose Aldo. He just doesn't have anywhere near the firepower or explosiveness. As far as Makashvili is concerned, he's a very strong grappler, very strong wrestler, and this guy's a Georgian champion wrestler. And when I say Georgia, I don't mean Georgia where I'm from. I mean Georgia in Europe. So, you know, the guy's very strong, and it's a toss-up, but my lean is Levan Makashvili by decision.
Interesting. So, Paolo, are you also picking the relatively new UFC fighter, or are you siding with the Brazilian in this one?
Initially, when I looked at this card, Makashvili was one of those fighters I really wanted to bet. But after watching a little bit more tape on Hakran Diaz, particularly against Ricardo Lamas, I thought he did really well against Lamas, actually. I had him winning one of those rounds, and I thought he could have stolen the decision from Lamas. He pretty much, like, because Lamas, he's a really strong guy, and he can bully fighters in the cage, but Diaz was like stuffing some of his takedowns. He was able to get out from behind the cage, kept pushing him. He's a physical specimen, Hakran Diaz. So I didn't end up betting on Makashvili, but I still like Makashvili to pull off a decision here. I think it's gonna be a really close decision. Makashvili is like, when he took that fight against Adiva, I don't think that was his like best version of himself, because that was like a last-minute thing. He had to fly over to the Philippines, and obviously there was that BS decision where one judge scored it for Adiva for whatever reason. So I think he's gonna have a better performance here, and maybe he's gonna win a split decision against Hakran Diaz. But this fight is like a pick'em fight.
I also agree that it will be a very close fight, but once again, I disagree with both you. I am siding with Hakran Diaz in this fight, but I really wouldn't be surprised if it goes Levan Makashvili's way. I think Diaz is just a bit better really everywhere, but again, with Makashvili now, it's a full training camp. Like you said, like you mentioned, Paolo, he was going into that Mark Adiva fight, like, what was it, like less than a week's notice or something like that. And he took the win. Obviously, it was a split decision. Should have been unanimous. It was fairly dominant. But I do think he'll look better. I do think he'll perform better. But I think Hakran Diaz is just one of those guys that he's better than people give him credit for. Because I actually did score the fight against Lamas for him, 29-28. It was a very close fight and could have gone either way. But I do think he's better than what his ranking, number 14, shows. But we'll see what happens later tonight. So the next fight is a middleweight fight between Thiago Santos and Steve Bosse. So who do you like here, Daniel?
You know, I got to go with Thiago Santos. I think that not only is he more skilled in the area that I expect this fight to take place in, which is obviously the stand-up game, but I think he's got more commitment to the sport. You know, when you talk about Steve Bosse, so the last time he fought was in 2013 against a guy with a 5-7 record. Prior to that, he fought in 2011 one time, and then he fought in 2010. So the guy barely fights, and he's dropping 185 pounds for the first time. And the guy is a former hockey player. So when he gets in that clinch, he tries to blast those big uppercuts, kind of like Don Fry versus Takayama. And that's not going to bode well when you're talking about facing a Muay Thai world champion in Thiago Santos. Thiago Santos is going to kick this guy to the body. He's going to kick him to the legs, and he's potentially going to knock him out. So I got Thiago Santos.
And Palo, who do you like in this middleweight matchup?
Yeah, Daniel really convinced me to look the other way here, because I was really gonna go on Bossy here just based on the fact that he's like this really big bruising guy, like he's tough, he's powerful, and he's got some heart. But Santos is overall the better striker by far, actually. And as Daniel said, Bossy hasn't fought in a while, and this is his first time cutting down to middleweight. So I mean, he made the cut, no problem, but you really have to question where his mindset is at. And he's just fairly predictable. He's going to go in there, he's going to try to clinch with you and try to use those uppercuts and beat you up from up close. And I mean, it's a smaller cage, so Santos won't have as much room to maybe keep him off of him and stuff. But Santos is like is a very high level Muay Thai fighter. So I think if Bossy tries the clinch game on him, he'll be able to handle himself well. My only concern is that there's always the chance that Bossy, he's the more powerful fighter, punch for punch. He might catch him and just put him out, but that's basically a puncher's chance. So I'm gonna side with Santos here. But if Bossy goes in there and puts out Santos, I'm not gonna be too shocked.
I totally agree. Actually, I was gonna side with the Bossy in this fight, the Canadian, but Daniel and a few others also persuaded me, and I am siding with Thiago Santos in this fight. I think his striking will be a lot better, but if Bossy is able to use that dirty boxing and cut Thiago Santos up, punish him, I think he could. Really, this could go either way. This is the closest fight on the card for me anyways, and but I do like Santos probably inside the distance. So the next fight on the card is a middleweight fight between Antonio Carlos Jr. and Eddie Gordon. Obviously, both of these guys are tough winners. Eddie Gordon won TUF 19 last year, and Carlos Jr. won TUF Brazil 3 last year. But both these guys haven't been doing too well since the finale, their respected finales. So who do you like here, Gordon or Carlos Jr., Daniel?
At the weigh-ins yesterday, both of them looked in tremendous shape. And, Matt Serra, he was actually at my gym today, like I mentioned earlier, with Dana White. They were filming a reality show. So I spoke to him about Truck Gordon. He tells me he got a new nutritionist. He's taking it more seriously than ever. And when you actually break down the matchup, Carlos Jr., he is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion, but now a wrestler. And, a fight, Carlos Jr., he's kind of content to lay on his back a little bit and try to hope he gets a sweep or some kind of submission. And I truly believe that Truck Gordon's going to be able to neutralize that right out the top position and get that much-needed decision win.
And I totally agree, but before I quickly talk about that, Palo, what are your thoughts on this fight? Who do you have taking the win here?
I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to pick Carlos Jr., but I entirely agree with most of Daniel's points. From a betting perspective, this was the biggest pass for me, and was so obvious because I'm just not sure where both fighters are at their career right now. Although with Gordon, it's good to see that he's taking he's getting a better nutritionist, and Sarah. And as Daniel mentioned in the Flying Brian podcast, Sarah Longo and the main guys in that team basically sat him down and said, "Yo, you gotta get your crap together. And you gotta win." And he has his back against the wall, so we might see the best Eddie Gordon since he knocked out Diego Lima. But the thing about Carlos Jr. too is that this guy cut down and he looks good at it, so he could also be in a better shape as well. And with the Gordon, he got knocked out viciously by by Josh Salmon, and that's a type of knockout that changes a fighter. So it's really hard. There's too many invariables in this fight, so it's really hard to predict who's gonna win. But I'm gonna side ever so slightly with Carlos Jr. on this one, probably to beat Gordon by decision. I don't think it's gonna be a pretty fight though. I think we might see a pretty ugly grind fest here.
I agree with what both you said in regards that it'll be a decision. I don't think anyone's going to be stopped. I think it'll be a grinding affair, but in favor of Eddie Gordon. Both these guys, like Daniel said, looked amazing at the weigh-ins. They looked so much more in shape, obviously, with Carlos Jr. dropping down from light heavy to middleweight. Obviously, he won the Ultimate Fighter over Vitor Miranda just last May at heavyweight, but then he moved down to light heavyweight to fight Patrick Cummins, and then now is finally meeting Eddie Gordon at middleweight. So it will be interesting to see how he does in the new weight class. But I do think it'll be a grinding affair. Really, I think Gordon's just going to grind him out, wrestle him for 15 minutes, and pick up a fairly dominant decision win. So finally, the co-main event. It was supposed to be Eric Silva versus Rick Story, but now we're getting another welterweight fight. It should be just as good. Lorenz Larkin versus Santiago Ponzinibbio. Daniel, who do you like here, Larkin or Ponzinibbio?
You know, this is a very exciting fight. Ponzinibbio, he gets better every single time. And the guy, he already has a 20-2 record, so you could make a case that he's a veteran. And he goes in there, he puts so much pressure on his opponents. You know, that fight with Sean Strickland, he gets him backed up against the fence, and he's just landing those big overhand rights. And, you know, he did get dropped a couple times, but the guy's so tough. He gets back up, and he keeps landing that constant output of volume, but it's power volume. It's not like Michael Bisping, you know, who kind of pitter-patter a little bit to get that 30-27. Santiago Ponzinibbio tries to take your head off. And it's going to be interesting because Lorenz Larkin, at 170 pounds, he is looking better than ever. And he is kind of a flashy striker, but he loves to counter. So if Santiago Ponzinibbio leaves a little opening, I think Larkin's going to capitalize and put Santiago Ponzinibbio to sleep.
And Paolo, who do you like here, Larkin or Santiago Ponzinibbio?
It's tough. This fight's really tough to pick because it's almost like a pick'em fight. Although I would say Larkin is the better striker overall. I mean, he has better footwork. He's the faster striker. When I watched his fight with John Howard, like I initially missed the stoppage there because I think I went for a washroom break or something, and John Howard was basically just done. And I didn't expect that at all because John Howard rarely ever gets finished. I think he's only been finished twice in his career, and one of those was by cut, and one was from way back before he was in the UFC. So seeing that fight again, like Larkin basically just came in there like a man possessed. Like he just used some quick hands, countered Howard, put him out, and beat him up. And when he was walking back towards the camera, you could just see he looked really angry and really possessed. And I'm like, that's the Lorenz Larkin that everyone wanted to see. That's the Lorenz Larkin that beat up welterweight champion Robbie Lawler in a middleweight fight, 30-27. So if this Larkin shows up against this fight against Ponzinibbio, he could potentially end him really quick, especially because Ponzinibbio he comes forward at you too. He's a very offensive fighter where he expends a little bit of his defense. But if it's the other Larkin that we've seen, the one who's sort of a little bit lethargic, who backpedals, doesn't use his footwork, he can get knocked out viciously by Ponzinibbio. So it's really hard to pick here from a betting perspective. To me, it's totally dog or pass, but I'm going to side with Ponzinibbio here slightly and think that he's going to catch Larkin because I think Larkin is going to back himself up into a cage and get knocked out.
Lorenz Larkin has been, obviously he's only had one fight since dropping down from middleweight at welterweight. That was against John Howard, like you mentioned. He viciously knocked him out in the first round, and I think he'll show up just as much of a killer as he did in January. I think he'll look very good, even better than against John Howard, who will beat Cathal Pendred on July 11th, just for your information. And Pendred is the favorite. So is that a dog or pass? But anyways, Larkin, I think, will just really knock him out in the first round. I don't think it'll be a close fight while it before the stoppage, obviously. And I do like Larkin inside the distance. I think, obviously, if Larkin shows up like he did at middleweight against guys like Derek Brunson, Kostas Philippou, he could get knocked out. He could lose a dominant decision. But I do think the Larkin that beat up John Howard, that knocked him out in the first round, I think he'll show up, and I think he'll knock Santiago Ponzinibbio out in the first round. So the main event, I can't wait for this one. Lyoto Machida versus Yoel Romero, a very important middleweight matchup. Obviously, Machida is coming off a big disappointing loss to Luke Rockhold just in April. So big turnaround, obviously a quick turnaround for him. And then on the other side, Yoel Romero is coming off a fairly long layoff. His last fight was in September of 2014. He had beat up Tim Kennedy in the third round. Obviously, some controversy surrounded that fight, but he got the job done anyways. And so, Daniel, who do you like here, Machida or Romero?
You know, I kind of wish that they would have given Machida a little bit more time to recover from such a hellacious, career-changing beating at the hands of Luke Rockhold only in April 2 months ago. Now, I said I wish they, but actually what I mean is I wish Lyoto Machida himself would have just said, look, man, I need some time off. I need to figure things out because if you think about it, so 2 months ago he lost to Luke Rockhold in devastating fashion, and now he's fighting Romero. So that literally means that 3 weeks after the Rockhold fight, he's already back in training camp, already sparring again. And I mean, to me, you know, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know if he should be cleared or not. But just as a person with a conscience, I think that it's too much too soon. And I think that Yoel Romero is going to make a statement here. So I was very surprised that he's the underdog, but I got to go with Yoel Romero here.
And Palo, do you like Romero as well, or do you think Machida is going to get back into the winning column?
Well, you know, as a Machida fan, my heart's with Machida, and I, you know, hope he has one of those last epic Dragon performances where he basically knocked out Ryan Bader when Ryan Bader came at him. Like, you know, there's a chance he could do that to Romero if Romero gets sloppy, but you know, I think the small cage plays a big factor because Machida's style requires him to have a lot of movement to basically hit and run from Romero and keep him away, maybe beat him by decision that way or catch him coming in. But the small cage is really going to play a big factor in this. You know, Machida won't have a lot of place to move. Romero's going to catch up to him. And Romero's he's a really fast guy. I mean, you might see him and you look, oh, this big, burly, stocky guy. He's probably slow. He's really quick. I mean, he knocked out Tim Kennedy when he was on zombie mode that time. Like, remember that fight? Like, he was basically, like, dead. Like, after that fight, Kennedy was saying that Romero was saying, no mas, which is why he was saying, no more, I don't want to fight anymore. But he came in there at the third and just knocked Kennedy out with a really flash right hand right there. I mean, he could do the same thing to Machida. Romero's a beast. And my only concern for him is he is coming back from a long layoff. And, I mean, he was injured. And I didn't have his knee. He didn't get surgery on his knee. He just on his own. So underdog, and I'm gonna side with the underdog here.
You cut out for a little bit, but I guess you're Mayhem Miller internet. What Mayhem Miller? So, anyways,
Romero. I'm picking Romero. If you cut out from there.
And Daniel, I forget. Did you talk about this fight?
Yeah, I picked Romero.
Yeah, I like Romero here as well. I think he will get it done inside the distance. I really would like to see the Dragon get back into the winning column, kind of just remain in title contention for just 1 or 2 more years before he retires. Like, obviously, he is old and his better days are behind him, of course, but I do think he could pull off a win, but I just think with the small cage, I think the Cuban fighter will pull off a devastating TKO win, probably midway through the fight, 3rd round or so. But I do like the Soldier of God to pick up that win, and I am playing that at plus money, him inside the distance. I like that prop bet. So quickly, Palo, any bets you're playing, any prop bets for tonight?
I only have one bet on a fighter, and that is Romero. I put 1.5 units on him to win. I was tempted to put Romero inside the distance, but I think there might also be a chance that, you know, he takes the safe route and tries to just, you know, clinch and grind out Machida and, you know, get him out there in the decision. And then I have a couple of prop bets. I have a prop bet on Ponzinibbio to win by TKO, actually. That was at plus 622 when I played it. It's down to like plus 590 right now, so people have been throwing a little bit of money on that. And I have the Ponzinibbio Larkin fight to go under 2.5, not under 1.5, which is surprising to me, and it was at plus money. But now it's at minus money, so that's a really popular prop bet that people have been investing their money on.
And Daniel, what are your bets you're making for your UFC Fight Night 70?
First of all, if you want my bets, you go to bestfightpicks.com, and on the top right corner, you type in your email address, and I send you my bets directly to your inbox every single week. But as far as this week's concerned, I got 1.5 units on a parlay with Alex Cowboy Oliveira and Thiago Santos. I got 1.5 units on Leandro Silva because, I mean, his opponent is normally a 55er, and he's stepping up a weight class, and he misses weight for a welterweight bout. I mean, and I wasn't impressed with Luis Gonzalez to begin with, and then the fact that his UFC debut, he misses weight by 4 pounds. I got to go with Buscape there, so 1.5 units on that. And then obviously in the main event, we're taking that that 1 unit shot on the underdog, Yoel Romero.
All right, so I have a really big parlay. Obviously, I told you guys about it off air, but I'll save that for last, of course. And if you guys want to make money, play that because I bet you will. But we'll see what happens. But I have a bunch of unders actually because of the small cage. I think we'll see a lot of finishes, like I said earlier on in the show. But I do have Larkin Ponzinibbio under 2.5. I also got that at plus money like Palo did. I think that I'm very confident in that one. I think Larkin will pull it off fairly quickly. I bet Thiago Santos inside the distance at plus 137. I played Hakran Diaz actually by decision. That was at plus money. I really don't think he'll pull off the stoppage, even though it is a small cage. I have a parlay I'm fairly confident in. Gordon Carlos Jr. over 2.5. I really don't think we'll see a stoppage in that one. And then, Larkin Ponzinibbio is in under 2.5 in this parlay, also with Alex Oliveira. I have 3 units on that one to win 12.38. And I'm just playing Eddie Gordon straight at plus 175. I'm really shocked that he was the underdog in this one, and I'm surprised the lines didn't flip for that. And then I just have a straight bet on Romero inside the distance, of course, at plus 250. I have a 2-unit bet on that one to win 5 units. And then the final parlay that I'm hoping will cash, but I'm not confident. So a bunch of the bets I already had. Eddie Gordon plus 160, Hakran Diaz at minus 190, Romero inside the distance at plus 245, Larkin inside the distance at plus 161, Oliveira inside the distance at minus 195, and Silva inside the distance at plus 384. 5 units to win 1,303.22 units. So if that cashes, I'll be one happy man, but we'll see what happens. So anything else from UFC Fight Night 70? Any prelim fights you want to talk about? Really, I like the prelims. Obviously, Alex Oliveira, I'm a big fan of his. I think he's definitely a future top 10 fighter. I think he has lots of great skill on the ground and on the feet. Obviously, he was beating Gilbert Burns, a huge prospect of the lightweight division, for 2.5 rounds and then got caught in a submission. And then now Oliveira stepping up to welterweight. Obviously, he did it for his last fight because that was on short notice. But I really like Oliveira in this fight. I think he'll pull off relatively quickly. But Joe Murat, I don't know too much about him. He's a newcomer. He's undefeated. So really, he could shock the world. But Oliveira is the biggest favorite. Anything else, any prelims you want to talk about? Obviously, we have Leandro Silva versus Luis Gonzalez. Danny Martinez taking this fight on short notice. Just overall, what are your thoughts on just so many of these fights, fighters taking these fights on short notice because of the visa issue? So do you think there will be any effect on that? Maybe more finishes, maybe more decisions, just not as great, lackluster performances? Anything at all, Daniel?
Yeah, I think one guy you guys really need to look out for is Tony Sims. You know, when I was scouting out the film on him, the guy standing, he switches his stances, he keeps his opponents guessing, he's very good at countering and setting you up for a big overhand right. He's got knockout power in both hands. But if for some reason the stand-up isn't going well, the guy's a state champion wrestler too, so he can take you to the ground. And let's say he goes for a guillotine and ends up on his back, he'll attack for a triangle off his back. So the guy is super well-rounded, and I really think he's got a chance at making a statement. The only issue is that he is fighting up a weight class on short notice against a huge welterweight. But as far as skill is concerned, this guy is very skilled, and I think he's going to make some waves in the UFC. So watch out for Tony Sims.
And anything else, Paolo? Any fights you are looking forward to on the preliminary card? Anything else that stands out to you on UFC Fight Night 70?
Just wanted to make one comment on the Cowboy Oliveira versus Joe Merritt, aka Joey Slash fight. This is the type of fight where everyone is pretty much just like fading Joey Slash because the level of competition he's fought is just like so bad. I think combined the record isn't even at 40% winning, which is basically means he's like an epic can crusher. But and he has a lot of knockouts. Yeah, I think all of his wins are by knockout. You can say he's literally knocking out people. But if it's anything like from what I see, this guy is like a physical specimen, and he's really strong. And if it's one thing that you can't really teach, it's power. So if I know Oliveira's probably gonna dummy him, he's gonna pull him to the ground and submit him. But like I was tweeting a while ago, like the upsets that usually like just basically shock everyone is the one where nobody ever pays attention to that guy. So I'm gonna say Joey Slash if he comes in there and like catches Oliveira, like that'd be something. But I don't expect it. I just wanted to make that comment.
For sure. So, really, overall, it is a decent card for a fight night. It's not stacked, but really, I do think we will see a lot of great fights. I think Steve Bosse versus Thiago Santos could be a great fight. Obviously, I am picking Santos to win inside the distance, but I don't think it'll be like a first-minute knockout or anything. I think we will see some skills from both fighters. And I do think it will end before the 15 minutes, but I do think we'll see at least 5-10 minutes or so of that fight. I think that'll be a great fight. Obviously, the main event will be great. I think that's definitely a big contender for fight of the night. I don't think Romero's going to wrap it up quickly or anything. I don't think he's going to take Machida down and grind out like a TKO win in the first 5 minutes. I think it will go to the third, fourth, probably not fourth, but definitely the second, third round. But overall, it's a decent card. And Palo quickly, obviously, like I mentioned, with the visa issue, lots of these guys are taking these fights on like a week's notice. And do you think that'll play a part in these fights? Do you think we'll see, not just because of the small cage, but do you think we'll see more finishes because maybe one guy is just more prepared than the other?
Oh yeah, that's definitely a factor in there. It could also be like it could also get dirty a little bit quick. Like I don't know, like because when you're like less prepared, you might just take less risks when you see that the other guy's actually better than you thought. So it's really hard to predict that thing. But I'm banking on more finishes. I think there's going to be a lot of finishes in this card. I think we might see no decisions. Well, I shouldn't say that because there's two fights like the Diaz Makashvili and the Buscape and Gonzalez fight that might really end up decisions. But if it's all straight finishes, I'm not complaining.
Yeah, for sure. If it's all straight finishes, I'm happy. It's a shorter night, and already it's going to be a short UFC card, 9 fights only with that visa issue. So I think that's about it. So Daniel, where can we find you on social media, on the World Wide Web?
You can follow me at Best Fight Picks, at MMA Thought, bestfightpicks.com, and on Fight Week, every single Wednesday or Thursday, depending where you are on the globe, you can look forward to the Flying with Best Fight Picks podcast where myself and Flying Brian, we break down the entire card from start to finish with in-depth analysis. We tell you who to bet on, who to pick, who to put in your counter move team, your UFC pick'em, the whole 9 yards, and we're looking forward to pumping out many more. Last week was our 10th, and we're going for 210.
So, Palo, anything coming up? Where can we find you on Twitter, on any other social media platforms? And obviously, you're a writer for Vendetta Fighter. Anything coming up for them?
Well, my name tag is right there, Go Palo MMA. I'm also writing for TK Sports recently, so shout out to them. And shout out to Vendetta Fighter. I've been laying low a little bit on Vendetta Fighter, but with the big cards coming up, I'll be sure to pump out a couple of articles. I'm actually working on some new articles for them actually. So instead of doing my usual preview articles, I might just focus on something else entirely. It'll be a preview, but it'll be a little different. So look out for that. And also look out for me being on the Clown Kids podcast later on tonight before the Bald Man speaks. So I'll be sure to tweet about that later.
All right, sounds good. And you can follow me on Twitter at NickUFC. Check out my website, MMAJunior.co. We'll have lots of post-fight coverage for tonight's UFC event, UFC Fight Night 70. And make sure to check out my podcast, MMA Junior Radio, at MMAJuniorRadio.com. Next week, we'll have Brad Pickett and MMA Sucker writer John Douglas on the show. Obviously, Pickett will be talking about his next fight at UFC 189 against Thomas Almeida. And John and I will just be going through UFC Fight Night 70. Obviously, this will be recorded after the fights tonight, and so we'll be recapping tonight's event. And I'll be on another podcast later next week, but I'm not going to say which one. You'll just have to wait and find out. So with that, enjoy the fights, and thanks again, you guys, for coming on the show.